I woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling that something was wrong. Not the hum of a car outside the window. Not the faint wind rustling the curtains. Something else. An emptiness. An absence. It seemed that she could still be felt in this city, even a month after she disappeared. Sophie was gone. The woman who disappeared without a trace. My best friend. We grew up together. We were always there. We helped each other through the worst moments of life. And now she was gone. I could still hear her laughter in my memories. I still remembered her saying that she would always be here. But one morning she was simply gone. No traces. No notes. No goodbyes. Just an empty apartment. I remember standing at her house, looking at her belongings, which were untouched. There was a cup of unfinished coffee on the kitchen table. There was a blanket on the couch, as if she had just gotten up. Her phone was left at home. Her car was in the parking lot. Her favorite sweater was in the closet. Everything was there. Except her. Why did the police close the case? The police were throwing up their hands. No evidence of a crime. Probably a voluntary departure. I almost screamed at them at the station. She couldn't just disappear. She left nothing behind. But they looked at me like I was going too far. People disappear. They happen. I knew Sophie. She couldn't just leave. She would have told me. She would have warned me. But no one wanted to look for her anymore. Everyone had given up. And I couldn't. I couldn't accept that she had simply disappeared. That she no longer existed. Something was wrong here. And I had to find the truth. But was I ready for what I was going to find? I sat in my apartment, looking at old photos. Sophie always smiled. But now, when I looked into her eyes in those pictures, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A faint fear. Anxiety. It was as if she already knew she was going to disappear. I couldn't wait any longer. I was going to her apartment tomorrow. I had to find anything that would explain her disappearance. Because if the police didn't want to dig any deeper, I was going to do it myself. I stood in front of Sophie's apartment door, clutching her spare key. It had been a month since she had disappeared. The police had given up. Her parents refused to talk about it. Her friends pretended to accept the situation. But I couldn't accept it. There were answers here. I knew it. I put the key in the lock and, taking a deep breath, turned it. The door opened with a familiar creak. Sophie was no longer there. But I could feel her presence in every corner. An apartment frozen in time. I went inside and closed the door. Everything looked as if she would be back soon. Her coffee cup was still on the table. The throw on the couch was still wrinkled, as if she had just gotten up from it. Her laptop was turned off, but the charger was still plugged in. Everything was in its place. Except for her. I walked around the apartment, looking for anything unusual. Something the police hadn't noticed. But all her things were where they were supposed to be. Her wallet was gone. Her phone was found in the apartment. But where was she? Something had made her leave. Or she had been made to. I opened her closet. Her clothes were hanging straight. Her shoes were in their places. No signs of a struggle. I was about to close the door when I noticed a box on the top shelf. Small, black, a little dusty. I pulled it out and put it on the bed. I opened it and froze. What was she hiding? Inside was a diary. Dark red leather. I touched the cover, feeling a chill run down my skin. Sophie never kept a diary. Or so I thought. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The first few pages were ordinary. Work notes, plans, short notes about daily activities. But then, something changed. The handwriting became more uneven. The words were shorter, more choppy. It was as if she was writing in a hurry. I flipped through a few pages until I found the first entry that made me shudder. I'm being followed. My fingers clenched tighter. I continued reading. I don't know who they are, but I can feel their presence. I hear someone following me. But when I look around, there's no one. I can't trust anyone anymore. Not even you. Not even me. What did that mean? My heart pounded as I turned the page. The next entry was short. Just one sentence. If I disappear, it won't be for nothing. I felt my hands go cold. Sophie knew her disappearance wasn't accidental. So why weren't the police investigating? What did she know? Is she still alive? I snapped my head up, peering into the dark hallway of her apartment. A sudden, terrifying feeling came over me. I wasn't alone here. I heard a faint sound outside the window. I slowly walked over to it and looked out into the street. And my heart stopped. On the opposite side of the road stood a man. Tall in a black coat. He didn't move. He just stared straight at me. I instinctively backed away. But when I looked out the window again, he was gone. I felt panic rising in my chest. Sophie knew she was being followed, and now that I had started looking for her, they had started following me. I stood by the window, looking out at the empty street. The man was gone, but I knew he was here. He was looking at me. They were following me. I felt a cold fear grip me. If Sophie was right, if she was really bothering someone, then now I was bothering her too. Her fear lived in this diary. I sat up in bed, opening the diary again. I needed to understand what she knew. What made her afraid? I flipped through the pages until I came across a new entry. He was there again. I know it's not a coincidence. He's been following me. I saw his car outside work. It's been there for hours. I can't sleep anymore. I feel like if I fall asleep, I'll never wake up. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly that it almost tore. Who was he? Who was she talking about? I kept reading. I told A about it. She said I was exaggerating. But if anything happened to me, she would know I was right. A? Is it about me? I felt a chill run down my spine. She wanted me to know something. But what exactly? Who else knows about this diary? I looked around the apartment. Everything was the same as before. But now I saw differently. This wasn't just a friend's apartment. This was a crime scene. And if there was a diary here, could there be something else here? I opened her closet and began to dig deeper. Strange things were striking. A notebook with torn pages, a flash drive hidden under a jewelry box, and finally, an envelope, sealed. It had just one word written on it. If I disappear, my heart sank. I sat down on the floor and slowly opened it. Inside was a photograph. A man in black. Tall. His face was partially obscured, but I could make out his sharp features and cold gaze. On the other side of the photograph was a caption. This is him. I felt myself start to shake. This was the same man I had seen under the window. He was the one who had taken Sophie. And now he had come for me. I couldn't stay here any longer. I grabbed the diary, the photo, and the flash drive, and quickly put them in my bag. I couldn't be in this apartment anymore. If he knew I was here, if he saw me in the window, I could be next. I turned off the light, opened the door quietly, and looked out into the hallway. Empty. I took a few steps, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. But when I closed the door behind me, I heard footsteps behind me. Someone was in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't look back. I just started walking faster. A few more steps. A little more. And suddenly, I heard a voice. Quiet. Cold. You made a mistake looking for her. My body was paralyzed with terror. I rushed down the stairs, ran out into the street, and jumped into the first taxi. The door closed and I shouted, "Go!" The driver looked at me in surprise, but he started. I looked back. There was a man standing in front of the entrance. He wasn't running after me. He was just watching. Just like Sophie had described in her diary. I knew this wasn't the end. I had just opened the door to something more terrifying than I could have imagined. The taxi sped through the night city, and I sat there clutching my bag with the diary and the photograph. I was shaking. This was no longer just a disappearance investigation. I had just seen the man Sophie had described, and he had seen me. I had a choice, or surrender like everyone else, or find out the truth, even if it meant risking my life. And I had already made my choice. Who knew more than they were saying? The next morning I met with our mutual acquaintances. I knew one of them had the answer. The first was Tom, Sophie's ex. When she disappeared, he pretended to be shocked. But I never believed his game. I found him in a cafe. He looked restless when I sat down opposite him. Don't you think the case was closed too quickly? I stared at him. He took a sip of his coffee. I thought you'd finally let it go too. She was my friend. And my girlfriend. I noticed his fingers clenching the cup. If you know something, now is the time to tell. My voice hardened. He sighed heavily. She revealed something. Something she shouldn't have known. My chest tightened with fear. What exactly? Tom looked at me with the expression of a man struggling between truth and fear. I don't know. She told me something the night she last contacted me. She was scared. She wanted to tell me, but she didn't have time. I leaned closer. Did she leave you something? A note, a photo, something? He shook his head. Nothing. But before she disappeared, she said that if anything happened to her. So what? I should have found you. A chill ran down my skin. Sophie knew I wouldn't stop, but she didn't have time to say what exactly I needed to know. I thanked him and left, but something about his behavior still bothered me. Her friends are afraid to speak. I met up with Laura, Sophie's friend. She nervously twisted her earring in her fingers when I asked her about the disappearance. Sophie was strange sometimes, she laughed nervously. She always liked drama. She was afraid for her life. This isn't drama, I said quietly but firmly. Laura looked away. And what do you want from me? True. She looked at me quickly and shook her head. I don't want to interfere. I felt angry. You've already interfered. Sophie is gone, and you're pretending nothing happened. Because it's safer, her voice trembled. I tensed. Safer for who? She didn't say anything more. I knew she knew more. But she was afraid of someone, and I already knew who. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I was walking home when I felt it again. Someone was following me. I walked faster, staring at the reflections in the shop windows. And then I saw him, the man in black, the same one who had been standing outside Sophie's apartment. My lungs tightened with fear. I didn't run. I took out my phone and turned sharply to him. Who are you? He stopped. And then he smiled, almost amused. You're digging in the wrong place. I took a step back. What did you do to Sophie? He put his hands in his pockets. She got into this herself. So did you? My hand clenched the phone. If you touch me, I've already sent everything I know to my friends. He tilted his head, as if assessing my lie. And then, suddenly, he just walked away. I stood in the middle of the street, trying to catch my breath. I knew he was lying, but I knew something else. I was really in danger, and I couldn't stop. I sat in my apartment, feeling my brain working on edge. What I had learned in the past day had turned my understanding of Sophie upside down. She knew she was going to disappear. She was afraid of someone who was following her. And now that someone was following me, I opened the diary and flipped through the pages. I had to find more answers. Who was Sophie really? The more I read her notes, the more I realized I didn't know her at all. I can't tell them. They won't understand. This isn't just a coincidence. I'm caught up in this, and there's no way out. I've been seeing him again. I know it's dangerous, but I have to know the truth. I frowned. Seen who? I turned the page and saw something that made me hold my breath. The date. The day she disappeared. I stood up, feeling my blood run cold. It was her last entry. I'm going to tell him I know everything today. Let's see what happens. What did she find out? My fingers clenched the cover of the diary. If she had met someone that night, that means he knows what happened to her. I took out my phone and checked her social media. The last message was sent at 10:17 p.m. I looked through my contacts. Who was the last person she had spoken to? And then I saw a name. Tom. Her ex. He was lying. I felt the tension burst through my anger. I met him today, and he said he didn't know anything. But why hadn't he said anything about their conversation on the day she disappeared? I opened the chat. Her last message. Tom, if anything happens to me, find her. Me. Sophie had confided in me the truth. And he knew it, but he didn't say a word. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find out the truth today. The meeting he wasn't expecting. I arrived at his apartment almost midnight. The door opened and he looked at me in surprise. What are you doing here? You lied to me, Tom. His face tightened. What are you talking about? I took out my phone and showed him his correspondence with Sophie. This is her last message to you. His pupils dilated. I took a step closer. Why did you say she didn't tell you? Tom sighed and stepped back, letting me in. I entered the apartment, never taking my eyes off him. Sophie was in danger. She knew something she shouldn't have known. I didn't know anything for sure. He ran a hand through his hair. But she had become different in the last few weeks. Different in what way? She didn't trust anyone anymore. Not even me. I gritted my teeth. Was she seeing anyone? Tom fell silent. Tom, who was it? He finally looked up. I don't know his real name, but she called him Cartwright. I felt fear tighten in my lungs. I'd heard that name before. In her diary, Cartwright knows I'm suspicious. I took a step back. Now I knew the name of the person who might have been involved in her disappearance. But would I be able to find him before he found me? I was walking home late at night when I first felt truly afraid. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at my phone, reading Sophie's text message. Cartwright knows I'm suspicious. Tom said he didn't know his real name. But if Sophie wrote about him in her diary, then she knew more than she was letting on. And now I had to find this person first. Or he would find me. Unknown message. As soon as I entered the apartment, my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced at the screen. The number wasn't saved. I opened the message, and my blood ran cold. Stop if you want to live. I felt my fingers tremble. They know. They're watching me. I ran to the window, pulled back the curtains, and peered out. A dark street, several parked cars, and a silhouette in the shadows under the streetlight. I couldn't make out his face, but he wasn't moving. Just standing there, staring at my windows. I backed away sharply. What? How did they know I had a diary? What? How was I next, like Sophie? I deleted the message, but it was already in my head forever. Stop if you want to live. The one who leaves no trace. The next morning I started looking for information about this name. Cartwright. It could have been a last name, a pseudonym, or even the name of something much bigger. But whatever it was, Sophie was afraid of it. I opened her laptop, which I had taken from the apartment. I knew his password. It was her date of birth. When the screen loaded, I went into my browser history. And there I found something that made me shudder. In the last days before she disappeared, she had been searching for information about a certain David Cartwright. A man who didn't exist. No social media. No mention in the news. But there was something different. Sophie had searched for him in conjunction with the phrases disappearance in the city, local businessman suspected, police hiding information. My lungs held their breath. Sophie was sure it was somehow connected. And now I knew, too. But that meant they might know what I had learned. You're digging in the wrong place. I was about to close my laptop when I heard the sound. The phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I felt my heart stop. I pressed answer. Hello. There was silence on the other end of the line. Just heavy breathing. And then a man's voice said, "You're digging in the wrong place." And the call ended. I dropped the phone on the floor. They found me. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't be alone anymore. I needed to find someone to help. And there was only one person who hadn't turned his back on me yet. Tom. The last person I could trust. I dialed his number, and he answered immediately. Something happened. They found me. He was silent for a few seconds. Where are you now? At home. But I can't stay here. He sighed heavily. Come to me. But be careful. I grabbed my laptop, diary, and documents, stuffed them into my backpack, and ran out of the apartment. I knew I couldn't be out for long. I hailed a taxi and looked around as I waited for the car. The silhouette at the lamppost was gone. But I knew that didn't mean I wasn't being seen. I had to act quickly. I still had to find a little more truth. The only question was, will I have enough time? The taxi sped through the night city, and I stared out the window, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. But Tom was the only one who had said anything to me. I arrived at his place, and he opened the door, looking tense. Are you sure no one was following you? I don't know, I answered honestly. I went inside and closed the door. They know I'm looking for Sophie. Tom nodded, running a hand over his face. I got a message too. I froze. What? When? He took out his phone and showed me the screen. The same short message as mine. Stop if you want to live. She wasn't the only one who had disappeared. I pulled my laptop out of my backpack and opened it. I found the name. Cartwright. Sophie was looking for information about him. Tom tensed. I heard that name. I froze. What? Where? He opened his laptop, started searching for something. Another girl disappeared last year. A young journalist. She was working on an article about some shady business, and then she just disappeared. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine. Tom opened the link. I saw a photo. Blonde, young, smiling. Emma Lawrence. She disappeared a month before Sophie. The police closed the case, saying she had simply decided to start a new life. I flipped through the article and saw words that took my breath away. Her last words were, "If I disappear, find Cartwright." I looked up at Tom. It's not a coincidence. She knew about him. Sophie knew about him. "And now you do," Tom muttered. "We're getting closer to the truth." I opened Sophie's diary file. There's another point in her notes. She said she had a meeting the night she disappeared. Tom looked at me intently. "Do you think she met him?" I nodded. "I'm not just thinking. I know." I pulled out her phone, which I'd taken from her apartment. Maybe she left a trail. I went into the Maps app and opened the last place she'd been. My heart sank. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I looked up at Tom. "We need to get there. A dangerous road." We left that same night. The road was dark, narrow, almost deserted. I could feel the tension building in my body with every passing minute. When we pulled up to the warehouse, it looked abandoned. Dark, neglected, with broken windows. I got out of the car, looking around. If she was here, we should find something. We moved towards the entrance. The door was ajar. I took out my phone, turned on my flashlight. Tom followed me. It was cold and damp inside. Empty wooden crates. The smell of dust and rot. I looked around, looking for any trace. "Look," Tom whispered. I turned and saw his hand pointing to the floor. There, in the dust, were footprints. Footsteps. They led deep into the warehouse. I felt my throat tighten. Sophie was here. And I didn't know if she'd made it out alive. The darkness inside the warehouse seemed alive. I could feel every step I took echoing, as if the place itself was trying to warn us to get out of here. But I couldn't leave. Not now. I leaned down and traced the footprints in the dust with my fingers. They were uneven, as if someone had been walking in a hurry. Or maybe, running. "She was here," Tom muttered. I nodded, but another feeling was growing inside me. If Sophie had been here that night, if this was the place where she had last met, why hadn't we found anything yet? Lost things. We continued following the footprints. My phone only shone a few meters ahead, cutting through the thick darkness. And then, my eyes found something. I slowly moved closer. There was a black ring on the ground. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal in my fingers. I recognized it immediately. It was Sophie's ring. I squeezed it in my hand, feeling fear grip me. She was here, and she left something behind. "Is that hers?" Tom asked. I nodded silently. He frowned and shone the flashlight a little further. "What's that there?" I turned my head and saw something white in the dust. I ran closer and picked it up. A phone, broken, but still on. A single phrase flashed on the black screen. "If you're reading this, I'm already dead." I had been noticed. My heart trembled. I turned to Tom, but didn't have time to say anything. There was a sound outside, a rustling. I shone my flashlight sharply toward the entrance. Darkness. Nothing. But we knew someone was here. I whispered, "We have to go. Now." Tom nodded, and we quickly moved back toward the exit. I tried not to run, not to panic, but every nerve in my body screamed run. And then, right at the door, heavy footsteps sounded from behind. Someone was following us. I grabbed Tom by the hand. "Faster." We ran out of the warehouse and rushed to the car. I didn't look back. I knew we were being followed. Tom started the engine, and we sped out onto the road. When I finally dared to look back, darkness had engulfed the building. I didn't know who was there, but I knew they had seen us. Night call. When we got to Tom's apartment, I finally let go of Sophie's phone. I didn't want to read those words again, but I knew there had to be more. I opened the latest messages on her phone. Last call. At 10:47 p.m. The number was not saved, but I knew immediately who it was. I called the number. Beeps. 1, 2. And then, a man's voice. "You shouldn't have gone that far." I froze. They found me. My breath hitched. The man's voice on the phone was calm but cold. "You shouldn't have gone this far." I felt his fingers clench the phone until it was white. "Who are you?" "It doesn't matter." I heard a faint noise in the receiver. He was somewhere on the road, maybe already following me. "What happened to Sophie?" I expected him to hang up, but he laughed. "Do you really think she was a victim?" I felt a chill run down my spine. What did he mean? I heard another sound. A deep breath, as if he was thinking something through. Sophie knew what she was getting into. My heart was pounding. Where is she? The man didn't answer right away. And then he said, if you want to find her, go to her past. I felt a surge of terror. I wanted to say something, but the line went dead. I stared at the screen. I felt a chill. I turned to Tom. He knows we're looking for him. Tom ran a hand nervously through his hair. What did he say? I repeated, go to her past. Tom frowned. What did he mean? I looked at Sophie's phone. And then it dawned on me. I typed one word into her correspondence search. Cartwright. And there was a note. A year ago. She had known him for a long time. I opened the chat and began to read. It was a conversation between Sophie and a woman. I found him. I know who he is. Are you sure? Yes. But if he finds out, I'm done for. I swallowed hard. I looked up the contact's name. L. Laura. I snapped my head up. Laura knows more than she's telling us. Tom frowned. Do you think she's involved? I think she knows where Sophie is. Last chance to get the truth. I dialed her number. She picked up the phone on the first ring. You shouldn't have called me. Her voice was nervous. You knew him. You knew Sophie had found something. Silence. I heard her take a deep breath. If I tell you, I'll sign my own sentence. Laura, if you don't say anything, we'll never find her. A few seconds of silence. And then, meet me tomorrow. At the old bridge. And she hung up. I looked at Tom. I think we just found our last clue. The next day I arrived at the old bridge, well before the appointed time. The wind pierced my clothes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I looked around, peering at the cars on the side of the road. Laura said she would meet me here. But would she come? Is this a trap? I felt my insides tighten. What if she told someone? What if I was simply being led to execution? She came. I was already beginning to think that the meeting wouldn't happen when I heard quiet footsteps. Laura. She was walking quickly, her hood pulled over her head. Her eyes were restless. Her gaze was nervous. She stopped a meter away from me. Are you alone? Yes. She quickly looked around and took a step closer. I shouldn't have talked to you. But you're here. She swallowed, her hand shaking. If I tell you, I won't be able to either. I stared at her. What do you know? Laura looked at me, as if she were struggling in her head with whether to tell me the truth. And then, she knew more than she should have. My heart sank. Sophie. Yes. She found the people behind all this. She wanted to tell you, but she didn't have time. What's all this behind? Laura closed her eyes. Cartwright isn't just a person. They're a group. They do things that make people disappear. And Sophie has learned too much. A chill ran through my body. That's why they kidnapped her. Laura nodded silently. They wanted to silence her. And she's dead? Laura looked me straight in the eye. I don't know. But if she's still alive, they won't let us find her. I was breathing heavily. How can we find her? Laura shook her head. If you do this, they'll come for you. They're already here. She shuddered. I took a step closer. Help me. Laura was silent for a few seconds. And then she whispered, there's only one place they can keep her. I held my breath. Where? She silently handed me the note. I unfolded it and saw the address. An old factory outside the city. Laura squeezed my hand. If you go there, you might never come back. I took a deep breath. I can't just give up. She nodded. I know. That's why I'm telling you. I looked at the address again. If Sophie was there, I should have gone there first. I stood by my car, clutching a note with the address in my hand. The old factory. If Laura wasn't lying, Sophie might be there. But will I get out of there alive? I dialed Tom's number. He picked up the phone immediately. Did something happen? I know where she is. A few seconds of silence. Are you sure? Yes. But I can't go there alone. I'm leaving now. Wait for me. I hung up the phone and stared into the darkness. I had to act quickly. If Sophie was still alive, I couldn't waste time. The dark road. We drove to the factory in complete silence. Tom gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. This could be a trap, he said. I know. Are you sure you want to go inside? I looked at him. I can't stop now. His eyes met mine. Then we do it together. I nodded. There was no turning back. A place that breathes fear. When we stopped the car, I felt ants running through my body. The factory was huge. An abandoned building with ruined walls, behind which darkness hid. "We don't know how many there are," Tom whispered. I checked my phone. There was no signal. "We're alone." We went around the building and found a side entrance. The door was open. I looked at Tom. "If something goes wrong, we'll get out of here together." I took a breath and took a step forward. Inside, the darkness inside was almost palpable. The air stank of old dust and rust. We moved slowly, listening carefully. I could see the remains of old equipment. And then, I heard a sound. A low moan. I froze. "Did you hear that?" Tom nodded. "She's here." We moved forward, following the sound. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw her. Sophie. She was tied up in the corner of the room. Her face was bruised. She was alive, but she was barely breathing. "Sophie," I whispered, running over to her. Her eyes slowly opened. "You shouldn't have come here. We'll get you out." Tom bent down, untying the ropes. And suddenly, Sophie whispered, "They know you're here. The last trap." I looked up and heard footsteps. Heavy, sure. They were coming toward us. I grabbed Sophie's hand. "We have to go. Now." Tom lifted her up, supporting her. We started toward the exit, but it was too late. A figure in black stepped out of the shadows. He was standing right in front of the door. I recognized him. It was the same man who had been following me. He smiled. "You've gone too far." I held my breath. If we don't get out now, we may not get out at all. I stood there, my eyes fixed on the man who had blocked our way out. His smile was cold. His eyes were empty. I knew he wouldn't let us go. Tom held Sophie tighter, who was barely able to stand. Her breathing was labored. She whispered, "Run. Leave me." "Never." I took a step forward, summoning all the courage I had left. "What did you do to her?" The man tilted his head. "The same thing he would have done to you if you hadn't been so stubborn." I felt anger welling up inside me. "You made them disappear." "Sophie, Emma. How many more people?" He sighed, as if tired of talking. "Enough." I took another step. "You're not going to get out of this water." He laughed. "Really? You think I'm afraid of you?" I clenched my fists. "No, but you're afraid of the truth." His smile faded. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I turned on the live broadcast. Hundreds of viewers. I knew they were listening. "Now everyone knows what you did." The man tensed. "You're playing a dangerous game." "No," I said. "I'm just finishing the game you started." I paused, studying his face. "The police are coming." Tom motioned for us to move. The man took a step toward me, and suddenly a siren blared behind him. I saw the red and blue lights outside the window. I looked back at him. His eyes were blank again. He knew he had lost. His fall. By the time we left the warehouse, the cops had already surrounded the area. I turned and saw them handcuffing him. He didn't say anything more. He didn't try to run. He just stared at me. I met his gaze. "You're not going to make anyone disappear again." He smiled slightly. "Are you sure?" I felt a chill run through me, but I didn't let fear take over. The cops pulled him into the car. I turned to Sophie. She was shaking. "It's over," I whispered. She looked at me. "No. This is just the beginning." Her new life. A month had passed. Sophie was safe. I had testified against Cartwright. His group had fallen apart. His name was now on the front pages of the news. And I knew he would never hurt anyone again. I opened my laptop and looked at the file we had found on Sophie's phone. A list of other victims. I was filled with rage. These people should not have disappeared, and I was not going to let this happen again. I closed my laptop. I was no longer the person who was afraid of the dark. Now I knew the truth, and if necessary, I would find everyone else who was still in the shadows.